Okay, well, thanks, Betty. And I think this is a great wish list, and I don't think I need to add much on this wish list. Just to remind you where we are, I mean, these are kind of all the tools we have in avalanche protection. We'll talk about supporting structures in starting zones. Very important, of course, is hazard mapping, and we've seen some of the tools we need for hazard mapping in Daniele's talk. And of course, we are up here. You see Peter here. And the challenges are really up here for the people who have to manage the roads. And then, of course, we just heard about how important it is have a common language to communicate the risk. That's synthetic.
It's a long, yes, of course. So I think we are still waiting for the presentation of Jürg. And actually, I'm doing you a question. So maybe when you are doing your presentation, we can start already the discussion. The question is, are you observing a shift in avalanche pattern, frequency, time in type? And are you seeing different problems arising that may interact and disturb infrastructure? So this is the question you can try to answer directly. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Betty. And as Daniela has mentioned in the very beginning, I mean, there's a lot of natural variation. And if you look at snow and if you look at the snow extremes, and if we look at the data, it's really quite hard to see what is going on. On the other hand, if you look at averages, it becomes much more clear. And it's evident, and I think we all know that climate change is real. And the question is, and connection with what Betty said, well, if there is less snow and it will in the future, we'll even see more or less or lesser snow, will there also be less avalanches? And Daniela has shown the large variation. I mean, if you more look at the averages, such as here in this graph, we look at the total number of snow days and how those have changed in relation to the period 1961 to 1990. And a snow day is a day where there is more than 50 centimeters on the ground, because then you can nicely ski. And we have a number of stations here between 1,300 and maybe 1,700 meters above sea level. And what you see here is then the difference in a particular winter to this average of about 90 days, so about 3 months of snow on the ground from, let's say, mid-December to mid-March. And you can clearly see that in the last 3 decades, there are many more of those red bars, and those red bars are much longer than the blue ones. So yes, I mean, there is a clear data that on average, as Daniele already has said, the duration decreases, the amounts decrease, and there are changes. But if we look at the avalanches, we look at the extremes, and we still have seen in the last couple of years, I mean, there was this famous avalanche winter of 1999. Then for a long time, we didn't really have severe cycles. We had hardly used avalanche danger level 4 in Switzerland. But now in the last couple years, 2018, Peter already mentioned 2019, we had a number of really large avalanches, and we had again a very intense avalanche period this year before Easter in parts of the valley. But on avalanches, there is really very little data that you can prove that there is a change. The only one I actually know about is this study from France, where they looked at avalanche problems. So they have reanalysis data back to 1960. So they simulated the snowpack from 1960 to 2020, then used an algorithm to determine the avalanche problems. And they also looked when the wet snow avalanches typically start in spring. And this is really the best evidence I know. wet snow avalanche cycles, they start earlier in spring. So originally that was sometime maybe at the 10th of April, and now it's rather like the 10th of March. So about 1 month earlier, we see wet snow avalanches. So this is what also Martin said, we have to stay flexible. It's maybe not as it was an experience. There might be wet snow avalanches during Christmas. So the other thing is that from climate projections, we know that actually there should be more precipitation in winter and there should be more intense precipitation in winter. They talk about 20%, and in particular at the higher elevations. This is the effect of that the snowfall is most intense when it's warm. So if it becomes warmer higher up, then this also means there will be more avalanches. Now, Michele has shown those extreme statistics curves, those curves that kind of flatten out towards the top. So the differences between a 100-year event and a 300-year event are actually quite small. So if we have 20% more snow, that would actually mean in starting zones, a 100-year event becomes a 30-year event. But what happens on the way down? This is then the next question. And there are two nice examples from the avalanche pass here in Davos. This is in 2018, the pass at the entrance of Davos. Very severe cycle. During the cycle, there was rain high up to more than 2,000 meters. And most avalanches, they kind of became wet. There was a flow regime transition from dry to wet. And the avalanches didn't got very far. On the other hand, in 2019, similar severe cycle, much colder, and we had many powder snow avalanches, destroyed some forest, and it was a completely different situation. So we can still have, let's say, cold, severe avalanche cycle, I'm pretty sure. Now we can try to look into the future, and one of our students, Stephanie Meyer, has done that in her PhD study. They simulated the snowpack. They used an algorithm to derive the dry and wet snow avalanche days, and then they compared that to the present time. Did run several models for different emission scenarios. So this is kind of the worst case scenario. This is kind of a best case scenario. And if you look at the changes in dry snow avalanche days, then you see there is for almost all, or there's for all stations, a decline in dry snow avalanche days. And if we look at the wet snow avalanche days, then there is for the higher elevation stations, there is an increase in wet snow avalanches, and for the lower elevation stations, at around tree line or so, there is even a decrease because there is simply less snow. And if we add that up, you see that in these projections for the end of the century, depending on the emission scenario, we'll have maybe a decrease between 10 and 50% compared to the present day. This is all based on climate change scenarios, the so-called CH 2018. We'll have new scenarios at the end of this year. In these scenarios, the extremes are not very well reflected. So this is more kind of the average conditions. So there's a lot of uncertainty here, as you also can see with these colors, right? Those indicate the uncertainty, and it will be important to have new scenarios and new simulations that also take much better into account the extremes. And with this, well, quick summary, will there be less avalanches if we have less snow? And will we still have avalanches in warmer winters? I would say the short answer is yes. The changes are already evident. We have strong seasonal variability, and something one of my old colleagues once said is that, well, the avalanches, they don't care about the climate, they care about the weather, because those extreme events are, or extreme weather drives avalanche cycles, and it's not the average weather. In the starting zone, we might have some more snow, but probably the runouts will be shorter. Will there be no snow at the lower elevations? But as we have seen in 2019, it is still possible. So I think there is no need to change hazard mapping procedures and things like that right now. I think we should continue with those. Be flexible, revisit them every 10 years or so, and maybe make changes. And we have seen already some shifts in wet snow avalanche cycles. And once again, as Martin had said, we have to stay flexible. Experience might not be sufficient, but we also need some tools and be flexible for the changes that already are in the future.